Welcome back to Inside the Kentucky Derby, your official podcast talking everything that you need to know on the road to the Kentucky Derby. I'm Kevin Kirstein, joined alongside Darren Rogers. We've reached the most pivotal point thus far in the young road to the Kentucky Derby season, and that is, of course, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which will be the highest awarded points race thus far on the road to the Kentucky Derby, but it also usually determines who the champion 2-year-old is and the favorite, of course, in the early stages for the Kentucky Derby. Darren, we've got a really good edition, I think, of this year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Sometimes you get like a solid standout, but there's 5 or 6 horses in this race that I think are really interesting early developing 2-year-olds.
Yeah, we're recording this early Wednesday afternoon. A field of 11 was entered. It's already down to 10. Koro Neo is out of the race, the horse from Japan. But the American representation that we have here on the home front, Locked is the 7-2 morning line favorite. You have Prince of Monaco based out at Santa Anita, and Muth also from the same barn of Bob Baffert. They are 4-1 second choices. And then, of course, right here from Kentucky, you've got Timberlake from the Brad Cox barn, also at 4-1. Oddsmaker John White, I don't think he knew what to do, what direction the bettors were going to go. But, I mean, in terms of that being a Fab 4, along with some other promising horses in here, you're right, KK. This has the makings of a very exciting race. You know, the Juvenile, on an annual basis, you know, last year it only produced one horse. One horse from last year's Juvenile made the Kentucky Derby, and that was 6th place finisher Verifying, who ended up running 16th in the Derby. In 2022, nobody made it. So, you know, it's always producing stars. 106 starters in the Kentucky Derby since the Breeders' Cup was created 40 years ago in 1984. 6 Breeders' Cup Juvenile runners have won the Kentucky Derby. Another 9 have run second. Another 9 have run third. So always a productive race, but in last 2 years, not nearly as much. I think it's going to be different this year.
Yeah, I agree. And just, you know, overarching that field, you mentioned that was Fab 4, and, you know, you have some couple of wild cards that are going to be thrown in this field too that could, you know, garner points that maybe will improve even greater as they turn 3 years old into next year. Darren, the pace of this race is really in the hands of trainer Bob Baffert, who you mentioned 2 of those Fab 4. He has a third one in this race, entered Wind Me Up. And it's very interesting to note, you know, just going over the race and handicapping it, you really, you know, it's kind of muddied on who's going to show the early pace, just because I don't think he's going to, you know, duel 2 of his horses on the lead, for instance, even though a couple of them like to show early pace.
Yeah, you know, look, on paper, you have to remember these are juveniles. So they may have to change their tactics based on the draw. And, you know, so if I'm looking at it on paper, who I think the fastest horses of the first flight might be, I agree with you, Kevin. I think it's Wind Me Up from the 3-hole. I would think the 8 General Partner for Chad Brown has tactical speed, wants to go to get position going into that first turn. And then I'd also say from the outside, the 10 Muth from the Baffert barn is going to want to get position, and they would be forward. Now, you have a horse like Prince of Monaco, who's down in the 2-hole. You have a horse like the Wine Steward, even from the 1-hole, with an aggressive jockey like Luis Saez. I think there's a number of horses that are going to be forward, and Timberlake's going to be up there too. I mean, this is going to be very interesting from a tactical standpoint as to how this race shapes up going to the first turn. Wouldn't be surprised if we see anybody going 5 wide, and who's going to settle in and maybe tuck right in behind them and get that trip. And maybe they can tip out at the top of the stretch and, you know, rally past what could be. I think it's going to be a very fast pace.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, it's not going to be, you know, any 24-second opening quarter miles. I think they're going, 23 into that first turn just to try and garner position, maybe even faster than that. When I handicap races, I don't really look at post positions all that much for older horses, but for these juveniles, I think it makes a big difference. And two of those names that you mentioned, the Wine Steward and Timberlake, right on my past performances for the Wine Steward, I have a bad draw written, and I like the Wine Steward going into the Breeders' Futurity, but I just can't foresee this horse sitting a better trip than he did in the Breeders' Futurity and running a better race than that just because he's drawn towards that inside.
Well, he got he had the one hole last time out in that Breeders' Futurity, and to your point, he got that perfect trip, right? So he was able to run second at 7-2 against Locked. He dug in, he was game. I could see him settling in and getting that rail run in the second or third flight as these others go.
And I guess that's my problem with him is him being too far back. They went 23-4, 47-4 in that Breeders' Futurity. And I think they're going a second faster probably in this early pace scenario. So he'll be
mid-pack.
He's going to be mid-pack. And I don't know if, that's his best running style. I think we saw his best running style was last time out.
But wouldn't you think that might aid him if we have a very fast pace up front?
If he wants to pass that many horses, it could. But I just think
You're just not convinced he can pass that many horses.
I just think his best races, in the Breeders' Futurity, when he was closer to that pace, he ran the best race I thought of his life. Even two starts back, I don't look at, those one-turn races as heavily, but
sure.
I just don't know if he wants to be that far back of a horse that wants to, take that much dirt. At least he's shown last time out.
Well, he's a gutty New York bred. I like how we're doing that. Let's just go post position order.
Perfect.
Go to the 2-horse, Prince of Monaco. I can't remember. We do this podcast. We do Inside Churchill Downs on ESPN Louisville. I can't remember where I've said this or not, but Prince of Monaco, I was a very, very big fan of the day on August the 13th, the best pal going 6 furlongs when Flavian Pratt flew into town for his lone mount, gave up all the mounts out on the East Coast, came out here to ride against Muth, and they got the job done, winning by 4 1/4 lengths. He comes back and wins the 7 furlong Grade 1 Futurity as Muth sat that one out. So look, Prince of Monaco has his Grade 1 win. And there's a number of people that I respect that I've spoken to out on the West Coast that have watched this horse train, and the son of Speightstown, typically sprinters, according to people I respect, the Prince of Monaco is not trained like a horse that they're convinced he can go 2 turns or be at his best at 2 turns. So at 4-1, I'm going to respect that. And he's going to be probably a toss for me. Peril at my own risk, tossing a Bob Baffert horse on his own court. But I'm gonna gamble and say this horse will not be as effective going a mile and a 16th.
Yeah, and you mentioned that top side pedigree, and also on the bottom side, there's lots of
there's
half brothers and sisters. Well, it's sprinters too. His dam was the half sister to like a 2 or 3 graded stakes winners and graded stakes place sprinters. So he does have the sprint on the bottom side too, even though he is out of that Medaglia d'Oro mare. There is some sprint that's in that family tree there. And I agree. He's one that's going to have to, be a pass for me just because on that breeding alone. Another Baffert trainee that I think is going to improve is just to his outside, and that's winding me up. I thought he ran a good race going 2 turns for the first time in that American Pharaoh. I just don't know if he's good enough as a stablemate Muth, but I do think he can improve off of that because, even when you watch those two in that race, sort of in the stretch, I don't know, they weren't really, lowering their bodies, making up too much ground. But I think that horse got a lot out of that race in only his second start.
If you're looking for a price, and he is the quote unquote other Baffert among 3.
Other Baffert.
Right? He's the other Baffert. I'm right there with you. I saw a video of his breeze the other day where he was on the outside. He looked like he was traveling very comfortably. He looks to be happy. He's a son of Vina Rosso out of a Kitten's Joy mare. So distance will not be a problem. And, that was a good effort against Muth. He went out there fast and then Muth set it up. And I know that barn thinks the world of Muth. But I'll tell you what, at 15-1, I think he'll be every bit of that. I would not be surprised if Wind Me Up is in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the pace scenario, which could be a very new element in this race for Timberlake. He likes to be close in his last couple of starts, but he looks like the type of horse, just in my training, he's a very big son of Into Mischief that I don't think he's going to have an issue if he gets shuffled back a little bit further in this race, just because he's not quite fast enough as maybe a couple of the others are in this race. So he may work out, not being as fleet-footed as some of the others, even though last out in the Champagne, he was close to a very hot pace.
I'm with you. I think he's a very promising colt. And I think with the speed possibly being on the inside of him, if those three go, Timberlake is the one that could fall into that second flight along the rail, breaking from post position 4 and get that tracking trip under Florent Giroux. And, look, he's a son of Into Mischief. Those horses are just runner after runner after runner. And his victory in the Champagne, albeit in the slop, he won convincingly by 4+ lengths over General Partner, who I also think has a bright future. He was all the rage and the hopeful. They had the big upset. Nutella Fella went over the top on everybody. And, excuse me, I know you were a big fan of his maiden win back in July at Ellis Park, where he won by 9+ lengths. So Timberlake is a horse with a strong future, and I'm with you. I think he's got that ability to relax.
And of all the 8 Brad Cox runners that he has in this year's Breeders' Cup overall, you hear Brad mention Timberlake first when he's talking about just his overall group of horses that he's bringing out. And that says a lot to me. I know they really think highly of this horse, but I think this is probably the livest of all the Brad Cox runners in this year's Breeders' Cup on both of these days. We mentioned the 5, Ikoro Neo. Ikoro Neo is scratched. The 6th locked. You can't really knock anything that he's done, Darren. I mean, he dug in and got past the Wine Stewart to win the Breeders' Futurity last time out. He just seems like he's improving in every single race.
He really does. It was a very nice victory last time out in that Breeders' Futurity, which was it'll be 27 days from the race. He ran very fast, very fast. In fact, his figures, I like to look at Thorograph figures. They are right there. I mean, it's basically Timberlake and Locked that are the fastest on Thorograph. And Locked, look, he's won 2 or 3 starts. And I think, being a son of gun runner, just like those Into Mischiefs, gun runners roll. And you get the, Todd Pletcher. How many times do you think Todd's won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile? I don't know.
That's a great question.
I'm going to look it up as we speak.
Yeah.
He's got loaded horses, but
the one thing that worries me is, you mentioned Todd, is he's always live everywhere he goes, but at Saratoga in the summertime, it always seems in the on the tote board that the live Todd Pletcher runners tip their hands. This horse was 12-1 when he debuted, which was very interesting to me. I don't know if that's to say that he's just a strictly 2-turn horse, and that's how he worked all the time. Is they probably knew that he probably wouldn't like that 3/4 of a mile, but very interesting that he was 6-1 or 12-1 in the backyard of Todd Pletcher at Saratoga.
Todd has won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile 3 times. He did it first in 2010 with Uncle Mo. 2 years later, Shanghai Bobby was victorious. And, of course, he won it last year with Forte. The trainers with the most wins, both with 5, Dwayne Lucas and Bob Baffert.
And Wayne, unfortunately, doesn't have one in this year's race, but Bob has that 3-plied battle here in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. The 7 Cuban Thunder, I think, is, well up against it. I think we can both agree upon. It would be quite the shock if this horse wins the Juvenile.
Yeah, I mean, look, the horse comes over. This is like a Hail Mary from AMO. What do you call it? Is it AMO or AMO Racing?
That's a great question.
But
we can call it both, and then we can cover our bases.
That's
we'll be right with one of them.
They do. They've become heavily involved in racing in recent years, both in the United States and Europe. The breeding is obscure, from a dirt racing standpoint. Profitable was the sire, who was an Irish bred, out of an Irish bred mare and Irish bred dam sire. Adrian Murray, the trainer, I don't know a whole lot about. The horse, won his second career start back in May, going 6 furlongs on turf at York, and then has not lifted a foot in 4 consecutive starts. Ran, 10th beaten 11 lengths, 8th beaten 13, 4th beaten 34 lengths, and then a decent third at 66-1 by 5 1/4 lengths. This does not signal, let's send the horse to the United States for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile against their best horses.
It's okay to dream. Sometimes these dreams turn into nightmares. However,
I'm wondering if this is one of those things. Look, they're sending him over here. Let's give it a shot, see if he likes dirt. And oh, by the way, we're going to leave him with X trainer.
That could happen. He's ridden by Tiago Pereira. The one thing to note is there's no dirt racing in Ireland or Great Britain right now. So
his performance on synthetic last time out 4 weeks ago at Dundalk, going 7/8 of a mile, that was his best performance. Maybe that signaled the Hail Mary, but this horse should be 99-1.
Absolutely. The 8 General Partner, who flashed that speed in the slop last time out at Aqueduct in the Champagne, ran, second to Timberlake. I just, I'm a little bit dubious of him around 2 turns, but you got to run somewhere. I can see why they're going to run in this race.
Yeah, he's out of a distorted humor mare. Might get that 2 turns. Speightstown does raise the little bit of a red flag there. He will be among that forward set, and I think he'll, be a part of that hot pace. He's 8-1 under Manny Franco. I'm not certain this is the right spot to gamble on General Partner.
Well, one that's going to be interesting to gamble on, if he can run back to his maiden race, is the 9 Fierceness, who's 6-1 on the morning line. He's owned by Rapoli Stable. He ran in that Champagne Stakes and never picked up his feet at all. He ran in the mud in his debut at Saratoga when he was the even money favorite, and then he came back in that Champagne Stakes, and you can argue that day was much more of a washout than his debut. I just, he's going to have to really, come back at the best race of his life and do a lot of things that he hasn't shown in his past performances for me to gamble on him.
Don't you think he'll be a little more than 6-1?
I would think so. He just ran that.
He should be, right?
He should be. He ran that huge figure on debut. So but he was going 3/4 of a mile that day.
He's the real wild card in this race for me, because his performance in his maiden break, or winning by 11, albeit in the mud at Saratoga, the mud can change, everything. But Air of Defiance is a horse that he beat by 11 lengths, and Air of Defiance, while not in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, is one of the most promising 2-year-olds I think we have from the Brad Cox barn. Maybe we'll be able to see him here at Churchill Downs in a race like the Kentucky Jockey Club. But Fierceness beat a very good field that day. And then nothing went his way in the Champagne. I mean, he lunged at the start, was in the mix off the broad, but if it could go wrong, it did. And he was beaten 20 lengths. Awful at a short price. Okay. But man, the fact that they're coming right back 8 weeks later. Now, Mike Rapoli, the owner, he's aggressive. Todd Pletcher, I don't think would have any problem telling Mike, hey, look, now's not the time. He's not ready. I think this horse, they believe in this horse. And so he's going to be a price, even if he's at the 6-1 range. I think he'll be closer to the 8-1, maybe even drift higher to 10, just because that last race was so awful. And there are others in here that are easily to get excited about. Last time out, we'll talk about Noted in a second, but I know at Keeneland, I think it was Fierceness and Noted, they breezed together, and the breeze was so well that Noted, who was, originally intended as first preference for the juvenile turf, they even said instead decided to try the juvenile. So you get 2 for Rapoli and Pletcher in here, And fierceness at a gamble at 6-1, I think is interesting. So, we'll see underneath.
I guess the point, if he's only run twice this year, he ran August the 25th, and then he ran October the 7th. So they run here in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and then he goes down to that big Palm Beach Downs training facility that, Todd brings all of his 2-year-olds down there at the winter time, sort of freshens them up and gets them, in order of, who's what. So there really is nothing to lose in this race, and I'm all about drawing a line through past performances. Horses are allowed to lose. Yep. You just have to show me that you can actually win at certain conditions, and he hasn't shown that to me yet.
And distance shouldn't be a problem. I mean, City of Light out of the Stay Thirsty mare, Nona Bella, I think distance is not going to be an issue going a mile and 16th.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just a gamble for, trying to see if he can bounce back into form in the biggest race of this year so far. The 10 Muth is a definite major player in this race after winning the American Pharoah last time out. He was a $2 million OBS March purchase, trained by Bob Baffert, owned by Zidane Racing. He's a big player in this race.
He is a big player, and it's his home court. And you said purchased for $2 million, and his excuse me, he's really run like it. He won his debut in June. Now, you don't typically see those Bafferts debut that early, especially the really, really good ones. But he did, and he won by 8 3/4 lengths, easily handled that. Came back with time off, ran second to Prince of Monaco. He was the favorite that day, 1-2 favorite, but Prince of Monaco was much the best. And then Baffert spaced those races out, and he came back to go from 6 furlongs to 8.5 furlongs, 2 turns for the first time, and he won it going away, beating Wind Me Up, the stablemate. Look, very impressive win. All impressions and vibes that I get with speaking with some people on the West Coast, the Baffert barn's very high on Muth. Why wouldn't you be? He's $2 million purchase, right? So that's not really a secret. My concern is, excuse me, if I'm looking at, horses like Timberlake and Locked, Muth has run a tick slower than them on some speed figures, not far off, and he could easily move forward with that wide draw. Even though I can see him tracking leaders, this is a horse that could get caught wide going into that first turn. And that's something that I'm going to gamble against. I've been burned many times, trying to bet against a Baffert on his home course, but I think he's going to be well bet. I think he'll be shorter than the 4-1, and he's going to be, hung out wide, and is going to have to work out a trip and be much the best over this group, when on paper, he doesn't look much the best.
Yeah, he's definitely going to have to run the best race of his life, even though
but a very good horse.
He's a very good horse. He was visually, he was very impressive when he won the American Pharoah, beating his stablemate. But he does need to improve in this race. And you're right. There's a couple of things that you can knock him on, just from what you just said there. You mentioned about how Noted was working with his stablemate at Keeneland. They had opted to go in this race. Only one dirt race in this horse's life, and that's when he won the Sapling Stakes at Monmouth going a mile. He defeated Dornoch that day, who came back to break his maiden at Keeneland. He, of course, is the half-brother to Kentucky Derby winner Mage. And then he came back in the Bourbon Stakes, ran a good second on the grass at Keeneland, and he's by Cairo Prince out of a Proud Citizen mare, and they're going to hope that dirt race 2 starts back can translate to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile.
Well, he's not, he's got the widest of draws, but I fully expect this is going to be the horse probably trailing the field. He'll just let him go. Let's hope for that fast-paced, and Arad Ortiz work out a trip and see if he can, weave his way in throughout horses. Look, he's going to be a big price. I don't think he's without a shot.
He's definitely one that I think our track announcer, Travis Stone, would like to reverse underneath in his superfecta plays.
I can see that.
He could be making one big run.
He's a good reverser.
Absolutely. That's the Breeders' Cup Juvenile in a nutshell.
Who's your ultimate top pick?
Ultimate top pick is, it's Locked. I think he's just getting better at the right time right now. I think Timberlake's going to run a big race. I just think he can be second best at this time to Locked. I think he's going to be much better as a 3-year-old.
I'm going to settle. I'll go with Timberlake. I just hoping he can tuck in that second flight along the rail and tip out, make that first run, and hold off some of those long shots that might make a run. I think it'll be a fast pace. Let's see what happens. It'll be fun.
Sounds like a little side bet's in order. Maybe a lunch at Wagner's down the road after.
Or it could be a sip of Woodford Reserve and part of the 200 flavor notes.
Absolutely. Woodford Reserve. We couldn't do this podcast without them. Thanks again for supporting the Kentucky Derby. If you're drinking Woodford Reserve, please do so responsibly. And if you're gambling on the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which I know both of us talking behind the microphones will be doing, be sure to check out twinspires.com. They have a couple of great promotions on the app that you can opt into, and be sure to opt in before you gamble on Friday, on Future Stars Friday. One other race, Darren, let's touch on real fast is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile, of course, is on the road to the Kentucky Derby. The top 5 eligible point runners would be 30, 15, 9, 6, and 3. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies is on the road to the Kentucky Oaks, and it's, it could be the storyline out of Future Stars Friday is how good is Tamara for the Richard Mandela barn, the daughter of the great Beholder, who tries 2 turns for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, Tamara is a very exciting prospect. The resemblance I saw on FanDuel TV doing a side-by-side of the finishes and the trips that Beholder had while winning the Pacific Classic years back, her mother, and then the daughter winning the Del Mar debutante, where, obviously they're wearing the same silks, but they're both Bay, excuse me, they're both Bay fillies, and it's just very exciting. And, sky's the limit. Now, I will say, a couple of observers out there have said she hasn't looked as spry as she had in previous days. She might have been a little dull on, Tuesday morning, going around the track. But look, Tamara looks like a heavy favorite. That's a deserving heavy favorite. And if you're going to try and beat her, I think there's only one horse that can beat her. And that's the one Candied for Todd Pletcher, who won the Alcibiades by a length, beat Vivi's Dream. Now, Vivi's Dream didn't exactly flatter her, but, Vivi's Dream did come back after a big effort in just 3 weeks' time. Candy gets that extra week. I think she's going to, have to work out a trip, breaking from the rail. But Tamara is going to be out there very forward, probably going to get a little pressure from Chattelis, from the Mark Latt barn based out there. But I just think if she tracks in second and then makes that first run on the turn, starts to open it up, it's going to be very difficult for Candy to run her down. But going to be interesting to do this. I don't know if it's the greatest betting race, but I'm going to zero on those two and those two only.
Yeah, I just remember Beholder when she ran in this Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, and she was such a later developing horse, and she did this all on, I think, raw talent, and she had her quirks, and it just seems the opposite of Tamara. Like, she's calm, cool, and relaxed, but yet she has that talent that she showed from her mother, which is, a key in this spot. I like life talk at 20-1, Darren. So it's going to be a good gambling race for me. Tamara trying 2 turns for the first time. I'm going to use this filly, off of the Frizette last time. I'm going to gamble that she didn't like that track, and you go to that race 2 starts back. She does need to improve, needs to get faster, but I'm just going to draw a little bit of a line through my past performances. I think she's a very nice gun runner filly who should appreciate the 2 turns.
That's always a good way to make an approach, especially with these young horses. Be forgiving on a performance here and there. They'll come back and surprise you. I remember, Beholder, did we tell this story on the radio or here? I can't remember, but Beholder, I remember her running in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile at Santa Anita in 2012. In fact, I was talking with John White about this, and she was gearing towards the juvenile sprint. She was just, and keep in mind, Beholder is out of, let's see here, hold on. Henny Hughes is Beholder's sire, who was a very fast sprinter for Patrick Biancone. And you're exactly right, KK, Beholder showed the talent, but she was very quirky, unlike Tamara, who's been very professional. But, she had 4 races under her belt. She won 2 of the 4 and went into that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. And I think she had a wide draw. I'm going to pull up the chart here. No, she broke from the rail. She broke from the rail in a field of 8 under Garrett Gomez. And she was 7-2 that day. And I said, man, this is the greatest short price bet against. She can't go a mile and a 16th. Yeah. There's no way a Henny Hughes can go a mile and a 16th. And she went out there and absolutely dominated the favorite, Executive Privilege, for Bob Baffert, who looked like she was going to, charge and run her down late. But Beholder had plenty left and repelled that drive. And Dreaming of Julia was third in that heat. So it was a very good renewal and look back at that 2012 Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies with Beholder, who, by the way, probably, if she doesn't fall down in the Kentucky Oaks before the starting gate, remember she fell down.
Yep.
And dropped Garrett Gomez, she might have won that 2013 Kentucky.
Yeah,
Oaks.
she was a phenomenal mare, and I may be looking back in a few years and saying, man, Darren did the same thing, except I did it with, her daughter, where I'm going to look against her and she's just could win on raw talent alone.
Do you have a Breeders' Cup Juvenile that comes to mind of one of your favorites?
I always think back to Uncle Mo. I was just such an Uncle Mo fan. And that race was one of those where I think it was the only ticket I cashed that day. So I remember that, but I think Uncle Mo has to be at the top of my list.
I'm so long in the tooth. Arazi is, and I know you've seen the videos, but Arazi is unlike any other. In fact, that was 1991 here at Churchill Downs under Pat Valenzuela, the horse importing from France, and still he's what, an adjective or a verb to this day, making an Arazi like move. That horse, when he came back for the Kentucky Derby, KK, you remember when Zenyatta came to town for the Breeders' Cup in 2010?
Oh yeah.
There wasn't much more hype than that. I mean, that was the biggest hype I've seen in my 15 years here at Churchill, with these massive crowds.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Dave Sweezy, the former VP of operations here at Churchill. He told me, Darren, the crowds around Arazi at that year's Derby were about twice as much.
Wow. That's
so
crazy.
He obviously didn't fare well in the Derby. He had knee surgery following that Breeders' Cup Juvenile victory. But the Breeders' Cup Juvenile is always eliciting promise and great memories. And as you said earlier, they will be the poster boy as probably the early favorite for next year's Kentucky Derby.
And Arazi's jockey, Patrick Valenzuela, back working horses I saw this week out at Santa Anita. So
he's got magic hands, I'll tell you that.
He's back.
He's got magic hands.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us, I think, today. I think that was about a 4-star performance, right? I give
it you know what? No, give us 5. I think that was a 5.
Yeah?
I think that was a 5.
Please
subscribe, leave a 5-star performance for us, and thank you again for listening. We love doing this. We love talking horses. If you're listening, you love it as much as we do.
Absolutely. And we'll be back to play some Monday morning quarterback after the Breeders' Cup. Hopefully we'll have full Twin Spires accounts, and who knows, we'll probably be empty like the rest of my Breeders' Cup years gambling experiences have gone. But until then, be sure you load up your Twin Spires account, as I will be doing right as I get off this podcast. Have a great one, everyone. We'll talk soon.